Welcome to the MEND, a podcast to learn about services and support for victims and survivors of crime, sponsored by the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I am Anna Nassett, and I am your host of this bi-monthly podcast and show. And today on the show, we have the wonderful Doris Sumner joining us to talk about sexism in the workplace. The show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crime. We want to acknowledge the healing process and provide resources not only in our state of Vermont, but throughout the country that could benefit community members, victims of crime, survivors, and those who serve them. I want to begin, as always, by offering a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss our healing, our mental health, and our stories. But with that in mind, we occasionally have subject matter that might be triggering. So I always ask people to listen at their own discretion. As I said, I'm delighted to have Doris Sumner here today. Doris and I have been waiting to do this for quite a while and gotten postponed, so I'm so happy to have her here today. We met through mutual friends in the Vermont National Guard. Doris Sumner is the president of Empowering Gender Opportunities. She launched her diversity education and consulting business after retiring from the Army National Guard in March of 2019. Doris spent 36 years in the Army and the last 13 as the Vermont National Guard Equal Employment and Diversity Manager. She specifically focused on gender as a barrier to equality in the military and received national recognition and awards for her work, culminating in the Legion of Merit upon her retirement. Doris has worked with lawmakers reporting annually on sexual harassment within the Vermont National Guard. She produced an annual gender report laying out the connection between sex-based defense and representation of women in command positions within the Guard. Doris, thank you so much for your incredible work within the Army and the Guard and the just amazing service that you've provided for the people who were in those positions and for our country. It's such a joy to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Anna, and just thank you for the work that you do to raise the voices and to have the conversations that are really challenging. So I want to thank you for just inviting me to participate here. I'm really happy to be on your show.
Absolutely. We are allies and activists in arms. Um, so thank you for being here today. Can we start off by you just sharing with our guests a little bit more about yourself, your history, and how you were drawn to this work?
Well, I was thinking about that. I grew up as what we used to call a tomboy. I'm glad we don't use that term anymore, but I really like the boys' toys. I played in the sandbox, I climbed trees. I took auto mechanics in high school, and then I ended up joining the Army as a truck driver. And I was taught when I joined the Guard in 1986, I was talked out of being a truck driver and kind of channeled into the personal service company, which it was a unit mostly women. And what we did back then was we actually carried typewriters out to the units to fill out, life insurance forms and do all the paperwork for the guys. And so I ended up in personnel as equal employment opportunity manager. So coming from the truck driving, the guys world to this very administrative job. And I, after processing a couple of sexual harassment cases, I just realized that I was in this very sexist organization. Now, I had been sexually harassed, but I felt like that's the hand you're dealt with when you join the military. I mean, that's just kind of the culture that that you deal with. But after a couple of cases and recognizing the bias in the responses, I thought this isn't a very fair hand. And being the manager to process these cases, I became very passionate to stop the pain from women warriors who really just wanted a fair chance to get their job done. And so I was I feel very privileged to end up in the job that I had. And I took it really seriously while I was there.
That's awesome. And in my mind, I'm going, there's nothing more sexist than your job being to carry the typewriter out to the man. That just kind of sums it all up right there. That's
Yeah.
wild. Um,
Yeah.
wow. So, as we dive into talking about sexism, I think everyone, all of our listeners know what sexism is, but can you define it for us and unpack some of the ways it shows up in the workplace and limits females' ability to not only do their job but also thrive and grow in their career? And I'm
Mhm.
speaking kind of generally like within the military but also within the general workplace.
Yeah. Well, first I'd like to say that sexism does affect men and women equally. It's harming all of us. But
Thank you
directly
for
it affects,
clarifying that.
yeah, yeah, but directly it affects women more because of our historical nature of, we used to be property. I mean, and then we got the right to vote, and then since then we have been forging this equal status, is what we've been working on. And so when people hear the word sexism, they think of sex. They think of sexual connotations, sexual harassment, maybe a guy glaring at a woman's breast or something like this. And those definitely are examples of sexist acts. But to me, sexism is that status gap between the sexes, between the gender identities, and the expectations around gender. So if you're a guy, you're supposed to act this way, and if you're identify as female, then you're supposed to act this way. And so when these expectations come into decision making and the way that we greet people and the way we engage people, sometimes it's very, very hurtful. So an example is the guy at the office who's always asked to unload the truck because he's the guy, when anybody in the office can carry a case of water or a box of paper. So these sorts of roles, they can be hurtful or helpful to one's career. But for women, because of that historical subservient status, it has meant a long, painful journey to gain that equal respect. Um, Even though we have legal protections and we can go to court and say I'm not treated fairly, there's still that everyday status gap. I have not heard from very many women who have not experienced either being sexually harassed or being dismissed because of their gender. So sexism in the workplace generally impacts women more negatively just based on that gender expectation and historical bias against women.
Yes, I could not agree more. And I'm going to share a small personal story that relates. Before I left Washington, I was the marketing director for this large lumber company. And so I was in like upper management of this company. And I sat on the first floor in this huge room with one, two, three, four, five males. And when I took the position, they're like, well, where do you want your desk to be? And I said, I want it to be in the far back corner. And while they didn't know it, that was so that I could surveil and see if the guy that stalked me was going to ever come in. But the other reason I did it was because being a lumber company, most of our customers were male. And being the only female in this main room, I knew that if I sat anywhere up front, everyone would assume I was the secretary. And so I sat in the far back corner because I wasn't. And I can't tell you how many times men would come in the front door, walk past all of the men working on the floor back to me and go, "Hey, can you get me so and so?" And I mean, it happened all the time.
Yeah.
And the guys that I worked with were really awesome. And like it became this running joke that I wasn't the effing secretary. But I asked to have a mug with that made on it, which I never got. But, so it was great
Okay.
that I had support of the men on the workplace floor, but that our customers still saw a
Yeah.
female and assumed that was my job. So
Yeah.
that just came to my head as we were talking, and I wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So shifting, what are some of the ways you are wanting to work? What are some of the ways you're wanting to work with businesses and military to combat sexism? How are you approaching that with your business? And yeah, just
Yeah.
some tips that you could suggest.
Well, the first thing that I wish I had the power is to let everybody know that gender bias is real. So many people believe that there is no racial bias, that our actions are really thought out. But we all have these brain shortcuts. They're just human instinct. And bias is not a bad thing. It's what we do with our bias that can be very bad. So once we acknowledge that we have this bias, and the way that we developed it was through, things that we were exposed to and socialized to, we have stereotypes that are kind of entrenched in our behaviors and the way we think about things. Um, and sexist attitudes are too easy to be developed because we have such this um, media is like polluted with these rude, objectifying images, sexist images or videos. So sometimes, we may laugh and repost the funny joke or something, not really pausing to consider that this is about somebody's daughter, this is about somebody's mother, this is about a person. And pause takes effort and commitment and honesty. And many people say, well, what's wrong with joking around? What's the big deal? We're being too sensitive. Who has time to pause? Shortcuts work. As human beings, when we see a lion, okay, we instantly go, that's very dangerous, and run for cover. But when we see a person, the problem with shortcuts is that sometimes we inaccurately judge that person based on just that visual identification. So I would love to help people or teams really practice pausing, and in pausing through our biases and pausing through some of the entrenched stereotypes that we may have developed. And some of them may be very healthy, but some of them may not be. And it's not about being politically correct or too sensitive. This is learning a life skill which brings us closer to the people we're sharing the planet with, or our office space, or the warehouse. It really is a skill that children automatically have, that they don't have to pause. They have this unbiased joy when they meet people. Anybody that smiles at them, they smile back. But sadly, when they're hurt or they're told things about certain people, they start developing these shortcuts and these biases. So the way that I would love to help people, again, is just develop our consciousness about how we engage with people. As oftentimes it's unintentional, but it still hurts. It still hurts. And, we're all busy people, but once we learn the skill, it's a gratifying feeling that you can say to yourself, I'm a very inclusive person. So that's what I would love to work with people to do.
I love it. I'm sitting here just like silently listening to you, but wanting to like cheer really loudly right now. Because that really resonates with me. And just yeah, I love the pause. And I wish that everyone took the time to pause a little bit more. I think that's a really great way of putting it. So thank you. Yeah. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have to sit here and quietly listen, but out loud or inwardly I'm cheering and like doing cartwheels right now. So, switching a little bit, how is sexual harassment different than sexism? And what are the ways that you are working to help protect employees and service members against sexual harassment?
Well, sexual harassment, sexual with a sexual connotation, is so damaging because it really pollutes the air with this disgusting and degrading stink. So there is like no excuse or justification to sexually harass someone. I mean, when we say why would he do that? Why, there's just no excuse. And it often is intentional harm. It really comes from this very harmful place. But sexism, when I was talking about earlier, this attitude of expectations around gender, sometimes that really is unconsciously, we treat men and women different because of the way that we are brought up and our expectations. So we don't think there's anything wrong when we say, that all women gossip, or women are too sensitive, or why don't you smile, or oh, she's got an attitude. And so we're saying these things based on our expectations of feminine or female. And the same with men. Oh, all men cheat, or all men are, they're not sensitive, they don't talk about their feelings. These are very broad sexist attitudes that we have based on gender identity. So these sexist attitudes form our behavior. And sexual harassment is an action to gain control from somebody, to intimidate someone. staring at them sexually to intimidate them, or purposely moving close up against them to make them uncomfortable. So how does an employer protect their employees from either of these harmful offenses? How can we eradicate this? And to me, in all of my work and research and studies, leadership is the most important tool in the tool shed, setting the tone and expectations around how everyone will be treated. So a lot of times I refer this to being the commander of your home. So you determine that in my home, when we come in the door, we take off the shoes because I don't want to sweep up all the dirt.
It's a
Or in
Vermont home.
it's my home.
Yeah.
Or in my home, we don't swear. In my home, we rinse the dishes. These sort of things, you're taking command of your home. You're being the leader of your home, whether you have children or not. You've kind of set the tone for your environment. And in the workplaces, and certainly in the military, the leader sets the tone for what people can get away with and what people can't get away with. So that's really important. And making it safe, feeling safe, just as you would for your children who are fighting, siblings are fighting, listening to them, validating that they, Tommy punched her or something like that. You validate it, and actually listening. And so I think a lot of times people take shortcuts and lack that leadership and say, oh, he was just kidding, don't worry about it. Sometimes people do make mistakes, and sometimes offenses are unintentional, but really listening and validating it and making an investment and mending whatever happened is so important. I think that there's just too many shortcuts where we just blow it off and the person walks away from the situation. They were offended, they were hurt, they were sexually harassed, whatever, feeling nothing was accomplished. And that is a lack of leadership. So
absolutely. Yeah, you walk away feeling dismissed.
Like why did I even say anything?
You're overreacting. Yeah, I have been there myself, having to make a claim in high school, actually, against a teacher who was sexually harassing me. And, it's sexual harassment versus sexism. Sexual harassment feels so much more predatory. It feels premeditated. I mean, there's that part of it that is controlling. And if we don't have that leadership, then we end up, leaving our jobs, or as I did, leaving my school or leaving the military. It's like, if I'm not going to get the support, why am I here?
Yeah. And predators are looking for those sort of environments where they can blend in and they're not going to be called out. If you are working in a very professional, respectful environment and someone comes in with these sexist attitudes, who's being disrespectful and predatory, they stand out really fast. And if you have strong leadership, they're not going to last there, because the leadership is saying this is not the environment you can operate in. So you either need to shift your ways of doing things or you need to leave. And so leadership to me is the most important tool in combating sexism at any level, whether it's just friends and peers in a small group and they see an inappropriate action and they step in and say, that's not okay, and stop it right there and support that person, or it's a supervisor or a commander setting that tone.
Absolutely. And it comes back to the pause, like you were saying. Like, it comes back to not taking the shortcut, having the pause, and being either a good bystander, a good ally, a good leader, and doing the right thing for all. Because ultimately, it's not doing the right thing for the individual that's been harmed. It's doing the right thing for the entire.
Yeah, to set up success for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. One of your offerings that I was super interested in, and kind of segues from this conversation, is that you lead facilitated discussions on sexism and sexual harassment. And I was really intrigued on how that can work to have a conversation between parties where one has done the harm and one has been harmed. And what, if you have a success story, or what you feel like the outcome can be for that type of dialogue. So it really kind of goes into our restorative justice. And I really was intrigued by that concept and wanted to hear more.
Great. Thank you. Now, so facilitated discussions about very personal stuff is definitely hard. And you would want to have people who have a really strong skill set and facilitation skills, and obviously set up strong boundaries and ground rules and things like that for it to work, and also voluntary. And it comes back to leadership, whether it's a team or a work center. It would have to be voluntary. So nobody should be forced to go and participate in these discussions. But if the leadership has a safe working environment, so you feel safe that you could go into this small circle and have these conversations, like at the National Guard base, the full-time employees, we started doing these lean-in groups based on Sheryl Sandberg's book, and her concept about recognizing gender bias and then discussing ways to counteract the affronts. So men and women participated. We had these solid ground rules, okay? And we learned through listening our own personal biases and how they showed up in the work center and how it impacted somebody else. So it was just, random people would come. It wasn't necessarily somebody who hurt somebody. Those two parties may or may not be there, but it became sort of a support group. So people who came every month really were helpful to people who came who were a little skeptical about opening up, and they would give stories about being maybe dismissed based on their gender. Okay. And so one example that I had was a woman who shared that she was the leader. She was the person in charge of supplies, but every time she went to supply rooms or people came to her main supply room, they would talk to her subordinates that were men and kind of ignore her. And she was not having the confidence to say, excuse me, I'm the staff sergeant in charge. And so she was sharing this, a little ashamed about not owning her power, but really expressing why she was intimidated. And she got so much support and feedback on ways that she could work on this situation and talk to that guy that kept coming in and dismissing her. And so it was really nice to have her come back and just feel great and talk about how she respectfully confronted the guy, had a great conversation with him, and that the engagements were so much better and she felt empowered. And so that's the sort of conversations, like the guy that was doing it didn't really even realize how it was chipping away her confidence by him not speaking directly to her. So he learned something too. And they're difficult conversations, but I think they're still doing them at the Guard. And it's just, where else are you going to go? You go a lot of times when you're at work and you're offended or you feel dismissed or even you're being sexually harassed. A lot of times people put that emotional angst in this backpack that they carry, and they might share it with their partner or best friend or their dog, but where does it go? It just kind of hangs aloof. But when you are actually talking to people who work the same place or on the same team, you're building this support system. Like, I didn't even know that you were feeling that way. And it empowers you, and it builds synergy in your house, in your team. So I would definitely recommend that businesses invest in that, because it just really, it seems like, we're going to spend an hour a month going over to these lean-in groups. There's definitely a lot worth it, to do the work.
Awesome. I mean, it makes sense. Like in normal times, obviously we're in a pandemic, so we're not in our offices right now, but
Yeah.
normally like we spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our families.
Yeah.
And but yet we're not sharing those pains and those things that we're trying to overcome, the things that we're trying to gain confidence in, to have more power of our own self and our own voice. And it sounds like a really good hour a month that will not only benefit the individuals, but benefit the business or the
Mhm.
base as a whole and make it so much stronger and more productive in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely worth the hour.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, you're working on a bill right now, which is so cool. I personally am very jealous because I really want to work on a bill. It's like this secret longing I have. Of course, our bills are never about good things necessarily. We want
Yeah,
good
sadly.
outcome. But can you share with me about the bill you're working on with the state legislation? And just, yeah, share with our listeners what it is and how you're approaching that process.
Well, the first thing I want to say is getting a bill passed is really, really hard.
Yep.
This bill is H401, and I've been working on it for 4 years. And I'm motivated to pass the bill because I believe that the requirement in the bill where the General of the National Guard would have a chief diversity officer will help make the Guard safer and more inclusive. Because in the Guard, they don't have a dedicated diversity officer. But more importantly, the bill requires a report um, on the number of women in command positions. As you said at the beginning, there's a correlation between the representation of people in your organization and the climate. And my work as equal opportunity manager, as I said, the first few sexual harassment cases, like 99% of my cases in the Vermont Guard happen to be sexual harassment or gender discrimination. Where across the country, National Guard sexual harassment is the number one discrimination case. The second is race relations, okay? And so other states, and they have religion. There's different bases for discrimination, but sexual harassment is the number one. And so my studies and my research concluded that sexism was the cause for the underrepresentation of women. Women do not want to join a sexist organization, and we can't thrive in a sexist organization. It's not because we're having babies that we have less women in the military. It's not because we don't want to be warriors. And so studies reveal that the military is the most trusted organization in our country. We trust the military more than we trust our government, okay? But yet the military has this long, horrid history of a high prevalence of sexual harassment and sexual assault. Even the esteemed military academies have this history. So the men make up, 84% overall in the Department of Defense. But in the top leadership, and again, leaders set the tone, leaders set the culture, they have failed to keep the military safe from itself. The male majority status, like I said, is largely due based on those gender expectations. People think, well, the military is a man's job. More men want to be soldiers or Marines or pilots. And it dissuades women from considering, you know, do I want to be in the military? So that's really what I want to change. And women who do join and experience sexism are not recruiting their sisters. Okay. And the problem is that there is no safe way to report that you feel somebody's sexually harassing you or somebody's treating you disrespectfully based on gender without receiving reprisal. Again, those shortcuts. Oh, he's just joking. He doesn't really mean it, and discounting it and not really hearing your fear, your intimidation, your confidence cracking away. So the diversity officer in the bill, who's hired by the governor, would provide this clear picture of the climate that women really are experiencing, and men, okay, but it would provide that unabashed picture of the climate and hold the general accountable to the strategies that the general's employing. The general's in charge, and they're employing these diversity strategies, but they're not working because we continue to have these offenses. So I'm confident that the bill could improve the Guard for all men and women, and we'd have more people lining up at the recruiting station if they felt it was a safe place with strong leadership to keep them safe.
Awesome. I say yes to your bill. I say very much yes. And yes, I really hope that that gets passed and let me know how I can help you.
Thank
We'll
you.
talk about that later. But
Okay.
yeah, so I do, within your bill, I do want to switch focus to a very recent tragedy that we've seen in the news. And that was the murder of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen. I believe I'm saying her last name right. I might not be.
Guillen is the way I've been
Guillen.
hearing it. Guillen.
So Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen. Um, for those of you who don't know, can you share a little bit about her case? She had made some sexual harassment reports.
Yeah.
Months later, ended up missing for several months, and then was found murdered. And it's just a tragic, tragic
Yeah.
story. And so, can you just share a little bit about this case and her reports of sexual harassment that probably didn't get handled appropriately?
Well, I can say that her family really is what brought the case to national attention. We might not have never heard this, but they demanded attention.
Yes.
They loved, they loved Vanessa so much, and they were just not going to allow her missing to be ignored. And they really felt that the Army Criminal Investigation Division was slow to look for her. So they were just, infuriated with Fort Hood and going to the microphones. And one of the things the sister said that really caught the attention of female veterans was that she was being sexually harassed and she wasn't being taken. She didn't feel safe in reporting it. That was the thing, so she didn't feel safe. And so her sister was, so upset that she was on, United States soil and a great big, huge Army base and not feel safe with brothers and sisters who have taken an oath to protect our country and live the Army values. And she just could not understand her sister saying that she didn't feel safe. So after this announcement, hundreds of female soldiers, got onto the social media and started sharing their experience of not feeling safe, harassment and assault under the I Am Vanessa Guillen hashtag. And in 2017, when Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, a lot of female veterans didn't come out. That was Hollywood, that was corporate. And it's really hard for female veterans to talk about the shame of their incident because they love the military. So it's really hard to talk about something that brings stain to something you love. It's very, very hard. But when Vanessa's sister was saying she was afraid to report, they could connect with that. And many of the testimonies under that hashtag presented a similar pattern. The harassment was reported up the chain of command, and the victims faced retaliation or further victimization. That was the pattern. That is why on July 29th, they're going to be marching, I believe, in DC for I Am Vanessa Guillen bill, which is asking for the same thing that we're seeking here in Vermont, a safe way to report and prevent reprisal and harm. That's how we are going to eradicate, and I use combat sexism. The military needs to be what right looks like, because the military sets the tone of our nation. It institutionalizes our values. So if the military has had these decades of reports saying it's a very sexist organization, how can America get better? I mean, so the military needs to be what right looks like, because all human beings that raise their right hand and say, I'm willing to defend this country, should be treated equally and feel safe. Feel safe in the military.
Yes, preach, Doris, preach. Yes. So I think you've kind of answered this, but how do you see a future so that Vanessa would not just still be alive, but would also have been supported in her claims and be able to still serve in the military? What do you envision? And it sounds like this bill here in the state and the more national bill really could help that. But what do you dream into the future for female and female identifying military members?
Well, it reminds me, one time I was on a plane sitting next to a captain in active duty Army, and she had branched infantry. And so I was just like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I'm sitting next to this female infantry officer. So I start telling her about my dream. And my dream is that the military, the representation of people in the military matches completely with the representation of these citizens of the United States. It should not be male majority. It's like, it would just be such a different military. Again, the culture would be very different if we had representation from everybody that we're protecting. And she was like, "You want to change the world?" And I was like, "Yeah, I pretty
Yeah.
much do." I don't see
So
that
what?
there's, yeah, it's,
Whatever.
if everybody does a little bit, things will change. But that's how I see our military being, and it's hard, like I said, because the military, we consider the U.S. military has been very successful and the greatest fighting force in the world, but it would certainly look very different if we went back, 200 years and women and men were both joining the military at the same time. The teams, the strategies, the way that we engage other countries would look very different if women were incorporated into the master planning of defending our freedom right from the beginning. So that's my dream, is that our military becomes not this male guys thing. It's an American thing that men and women both want to join, and they get in there, and they do have, and that's why men really love the military. It is that camaraderie, it's that brotherhood, it's knowing he's got your back, and women, and again, many soldiers and service members do experience that, but there's too many that don't. There's too
Yep.
many that are fearful. And so that's my dream, is really to have a militia that looks like America, and people do experience the great things that the military can offer.
That's awesome. I love that dream. Thank you so much for sharing. I do want to apologize to if people are viewing this. I'm sorry that my screen has gone very dark. I don't know what's happened with the light outside, so I just wanted to acknowledge and apologize for that. Um, well, Doris, it's just been so awesome to have you on here. I'm so glad we finally got to do this. This has been one of my favorite interviews that I've had on here. And as we're winding down, is there anything else that you'd like to share on this episode today?
Well, I would like to thank anybody listening, because you're investing in listening, and just opening up your hearts to how you can help the survivors, regardless where on the spectrum of harm you experience sexism. Sex-based offenses or crimes, they cut deep, and they really last forever. There's a lot of recovery work um, that goes into healing that sort of pain that's inflicted upon you. They impact everyone in a different way. So I do want to thank the many women who have trusted me with their pain, and there have been women who have shared with me these really harmful things that happened to them, and the humiliation of trying to get to be made whole and to heal. So I want to thank them. That's why I fight so hard. I believe the military should be what it looks like. I care about the civilian world too, right? I know it happens everywhere. And I just want the military to model what we can be as a country, of treating human beings based on their insides, instead of, that visual judgment. She's female, he's male, just those shortcuts can cause a lot of problems. So thank you to everybody who's listening, and for the women who have shared their pain with me. I'm going to fight as hard as I can to make the world a better place.
Awesome. And you're doing it every day. So thank you for all that you do to create a better and safer society. It's awesome. Doris Sumner, it's been a joy having you here today. I can't wait till we get together in person.
Yeah, let's do another hike.
Yes, exactly. That was where I think we maybe met briefly before, but we met at a friend's retirement party with an all-female women empowering women Wonder Woman hike, and it was awesome.
Yeah, there's something about a bunch of women together.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you put us all in Wonder Woman t-shirts. It's awesome. Yeah. If you would like to learn more about Doris's work or have trainings done by her, you can go to it'sallaboutego.com, and you can learn more about Doris and everything she does. I always like to close with just a short, positive, like one sentence message that maybe you'd like to share with our listeners, just to kind of empower them for the week.
Own your power. Own your power.
Love it. Own your power. I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go do that right now. That does it for this week, my friends. Thank you again, Doris, for joining us. As always, if you have any questions or ideas about the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me at anna@standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nassett, signing off for this week and another episode of The MEND. Be well, be strong, and goodbye.